MLBTradeRumors.com has released their arbitration projections, giving us a better idea of what the Mariners' payroll situation will look like in 2025. We'll tell you where things stand and who could be tendered and non-tendered coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, it's that time of the off season where MLBTradeRumors.com releases their arbitration projections. We're going to go over their projections for the Mariners, tell you a little bit about what Seattle's payroll situation looks like as a whole, and tell you who we think could get tendered and non-tendered. But before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, Booking.com. Booking. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball, and get the Booking.com app today. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So, because this isn't a very straightforward process, I mean, it is, but it's not one that maybe a lot of casual fans are aware of, like is the case with a lot of things in Major League Baseball, unfortunately. We're going to start here like we do every year when talking about arbitration. Colby, can you tell us a little bit about what arbitration is?
Essentially, what it is that you are contractually owned, essentially, by your team for the first 6 years of your career. Now, the team can DFA you, they could trade you, whatever. So basically, until you have 6 years of Major League service time, you are with the team that currently holds your contract no matter what. The first 3 years of those 6 years, you are making league minimum, which this year was, I think, about 740. Next year, I think jumps to 780, 100,000. But that's essentially what you're going to make for the first 3 years of your career. There are some guys who get some performance bumps and they get an adjusted salary, but very rarely does anybody make more than $3 million or more than $1 million in their first 3 years in any one of those seasons. After that, after the completion of your third season in the winter, you are now arbitration eligible, and you are arbitration eligible. Most players are arbitration eligible 3 times before they become a free agent. Essentially, what the arbitration process is that it is a tiered system. The closer you are to free agency, the higher your number is, the higher you can ask for is. So if you are what we call ARB1, you are in your first year of arbitration. If you are ARB2, you are in your second year. And if you are ARB3, you are in your final year of arbitration, which another word for that would be you are a rental, essentially. ARB1 guys make significantly less than ARB2 guys. ARB2 guys significantly less than ARB3. Basically, it's a scale. It's a scale pay. The way that arbitration works is it's heavily based on comps. This is what similar players got last year. That's what I won. And then it's adjusted for inflation. And obviously there's not always perfect comps for every player. So it's a bit of a sliding scale, but essentially the agent and the player will go to the team and say, we want this much for this year. This is what we think we're worth. The team will present their number. And usually what happens is the two sides will find some middle ground and they will pick a number. So for example, if player A wants $5 million, but the team wants $5 million, but the team wants to pay him $4 million, then typically what happens is they meet somewhere in the middle. For simplicity, we'll call it $4.5 million, and you will play on what is essentially a 1-year $4.5 million option, $4.5 million deal with a team option for the following season. That the price will be negotiated at that point. That's typically how it works. That's a pretty cut and dry version of it. There are certain players called Super Twos, and those are for players who have 2+ years of Major League service time, where they just missed the third year by a couple of days at the big league level. And in those cases, I think it's the top 20% of those players are what is called Super 2 eligible, which means they get a fourth year of arbitration. So if you ever see somebody say they're ARB4, that just means that they were a Super 2. And Super 2s get paid the same as ARB1 guys. It's the same type of scale. They just get one more crack at it. For example, George Kirby is a Super 2 because he debuted in like May of his rookie year. And so he didn't have quite enough days to qualify for a full year of service time, but he had enough days to garner Super 2 status. There's 180 days in a major league season. And typically the Super 2 status is reserved for players with about 130-ish to 130-ish days in the majors. It's part of it is supposed to be to kind of prevent like the service timing thing a little bit, but it doesn't really work. Teams just pay Super 2s. But yeah, that's basically it. Essentially, it is an arbitration is what it is. It's you and your agent versus the team trying to decide how much money you're going to get paid for the upcoming season. In the event that the two sides cannot come to an agreement, which is pretty rare for most teams. There are some teams that purposely do that, which is stupid, but in the
Brewers and Corbin Burns are a prime example recently.
Right. But anyways, so if the two sides don't agree, then they go to arbitration. They will sit in front of a judge, and the two sides will. It's supposed to be the two sides try and convince the judge that they're worth their number, but essentially what happens is that the player's agent will make his case for his player to be paid X, and then the team's lawyer or whatever will basically try and tear down the player to explain why he's not worth that much. And then the judge or the arbiter gets to pick. He picks one of the two numbers. There is no middle ground at that point. He is either picking the team's number or the player's number. And whatever he decides, that is the number that the players will get. So
unfortunately, it's a very nasty process where feelings get hurt a lot. And it's typically over maybe a couple $100,000.
Yes. Most teams greatly prefer to come to some kind of understanding because, again, you avoid the whole nastiness thing. And things are said that, players could hold grudges on that might prevent you from re-signing them in the future. So most teams will do everything in their power to avoid arbitration. Now, the Mariners have gone to arbitration fairly recently with a player. They went to arbitration with Teoscar Hernandez. That was over $2 million. And the Mariners won that case. They paid Teoscar their number. So sometimes players do come in at a price that is frankly ridiculous. It's very rare. And at that point, the team pretty much has no choice. But a lot of times you'll see teams threaten to go to arbitration over like $50,000. And so when we talk about, should they tender this guy, blah, 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 it's like essentially is the number that they're requesting, is it worth it? Because that's probably what you want to pay them. You probably want to pay them as close to their number as you can, because the chump change essentially that you save by going to arbitration almost always comes back to bite you down the line. Yeah. So just come to an agreement. It behooves both player and club to come to an agreement on a number. And again, these things are structured in a way that it's still greatly beneficial to the team. They're still getting a heck of a deal if you're in arbitration. And so, you don't want to go to arbitration, but the whole process of exchanging numbers, finding a number, that the whole process is called arbitration, but actually technically it's not arbitration unless you go to the trial. So
long story short, you can either offer an arbitration eligible player arbitration, tender them a contract, or you non-tender them and they become a free agent. If you offer them a contract, you're going to have that player the following year. The only thing that's in question is how much money they're going to make. So either they're going to make what both parties agree upon, or what a judge determines in an arbitration hearing sometime in January or February. So let's get into all the arbitration eligible players for the Mariners and what MLBTradeRumors.com is projecting them at. Austin Voth, $2.2 million. JT Chagua, $1.7 million. Luis Arias, $5 million. Trent Thornton, $2.1 million. Randy Arozarena, $11.7 million. Josh Rojas, $4.3 million. Sam Haggerty, $900,000. Logan Gilbert, $8.1 million. Taylor Saucedo, $1 million. Cal Raleigh, $5.6 million. Gabe Spire, $900,000. And George Kirby, $5.5 million. So we're going to talk about where that puts the Mariners payroll wise in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel and PrizePicks. NFL fans can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Yeah, you heard that right. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Think Tyreek Hill will get more than 90.5 yards in week 1? Or that Caleb Williams will throw for fewer than 236.5 yards in his debut? Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. So we are talking about the Mariners arbitration projections from MLBTradeRumors.com. We just laid out what those projections are. So now let's kind of do some math here real quick, Colby. So if you account for Mitch Haniger's option, which he's going to accept, that's $17.5 million. The Mariners have $96.4 million guaranteed on the roster. So that includes Julio and Luis Castillo and even guys like Andres Munoz and Victor Robles, etc. That number goes up to $108.4 million if Jorge Polanco's option is picked up, or $97.1 million if it's declined, factoring in his $750,000 buyout. So all those projections that I listed at the end of the previous segment adds up to $49 million. So if you tendered every single player at those numbers projected by MLB Trade Rumors, you would be adding $49 million in payroll. If you declined everyone not named Randy Arozarena, Logan Gilbert, Cal Raleigh, and George Kirby, because those are like the 4 absolute locks, obviously. They're going to tender all 4 of those guys. But if you non-tendered everyone else, the other 8 guys, that would put you at about roughly $128 million, assuming that you decline Polanco's option. So, Colby, what are your thoughts on some of the projections and where this all leaves the Mariners?
Yeah, it's also worth noting that the 128 number, if they only offered arbitration to the Big Four, doesn't include the rest of the 4 or 5 pre-arb league minimum guys.
Yeah.
Those guys are going to make about, we'll just call it $800,000. So that's going to add about $3 million-ish to the 26-man payroll, and then the 40-man payroll is a whole other thing. 26. So the 26-man probably starts at 130. Again, assuming they just tender these 4 guys, which we know is going to happen. Right off the jump, there's some really easy calls here. You're not giving Luis Urias $5 million. Like, he might get a minor league deal this winter. That might be what he has to settle for. But that's really kind of it in terms of like the obvious non-tenders. Because Josh Rojas came in at 4.3, which is interesting because Rojas was not good this year, and I definitely don't want him back next year as the third baseman. But if he is more of a utility guy, or he is a stopgap second base type until maybe Cole Young is ready, at $4 million, that's pretty palatable, because he's probably giving you that value just on defense alone is probably worth $4 million. Trent Thornton's an interesting one here at $2.1 million. He is a perfectly adequate middle reliever, but he really struggled at times this year. And the Mariners seem to have, really good luck finding middle relief types out of nowhere. So can you shave that and save $1.5 million? You might be able to. So yeah, it's an interesting list. The 4 guys that you mentioned are obviously getting tendered. Luis Urias, obviously not. Sam Haggerty, my assumption would be at 900,000. If they did it, that's just barely over league minimum. That's really not a huge deal. But my assumption would be is that he's non-tendered and they just bring him back on a minor league deal as he works through his Achilles tear. So looking at all this, depending on what you want to do with Rojas, he's kind of the X factor here. I feel like the Mariners could, in theory, reasonably be expected to well, here we go again. What's reasonable? They should be spending close to $200 million minimum on the club, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to, yada, yada. So overall payroll, I think based on what we see right now, they should have more than enough flexibility to go out there and acquire meaningful upgrades, meaningful talent without having to do what they did last year, which you guys remember, trade Gino to clear up some space, trade Kelnick to free up Gonzalez and Evan White. Like, they shouldn't have to do that. And Jerry Dipoto has hinted as much in his postseason press conference. Now, the big X factor here is, what is the actual budget end up being? Because as we know, what it's been in the past on days like today isn't what it is when it's time to go out and get players.
Yesterday's price now might be today's price, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just for yesterday's budget might not be today's budget, right? So, obviously, all the stand caveats apply. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But again, if they're going into this offseason with $130 million, give or take, committed to the 26-man roster, I would assume they finished the year at 148. So to beat that, they already have $20 million-ish in free agency. I think they should almost certainly be willing to go to 160, 165. So based on what I'm kind of projecting, they might be willing to spend. And again, I'm guessing. I'm trying to give a conservative estimate here. If it's at 160, then in theory, they should have about $30 million. Now, that dries up pretty quick when you're, talking about signing significant bats or trading for significant bats. And, we'll see if John Stanton even allows them to spend that money on free agency. So, I still think they're going to have to get creative. They don't have endless amounts of money in the budget, by them being, Jerry Dipoto and Hollander, to build this team. But they should have enough to avoid the, hey, we have to get Mitch Garver off of our books by any cause necessary. So let's attach, this top 100-ish. Let's attach Ty Pete to get rid of $7 million of that, so we can go get this middle relief type. So we can go get Ryan Stanek. You know what I mean? They should be able to avoid stuff like that, which I guess is at least a step in the right direction if you want to be positive about it. But overall, I feel pretty, as reasonably as I can, pretty okay about where they're at monetarily this year, and what that means they are likely able to bring in, the type of player they are likely able to bring in this winter. I feel like they can still, if it's at about 160, 165, I feel like at that point they could actually accomplish their goals. If it's 150, I don't know if they can get it done, because that's just a very tight window to go from 130 to 150. That's really tight. And that's, again, the 130 is assuming that they only tender those 4 guys, and we know they're going to tender more. So my gut feel is that the Mariners are going to have about, when you consider all the tenders and all that stuff, my gut feels that the Mariners are going to have about $20 million to spend this winter, the front office, pending the tenders, right? That's a big X factor, because like you said, the tenders add up to, what's 48 million, 49 million?
49.
And we know that at least 35 of that is the big 4. So you can shave another $14 million, but then that's, 8 more roster spots you have to fill up. So it's definitely kind of a pick and choose type of thing here. And there's going to be some, like I said, a lot of these are judgment calls, and you can, hey, if you want to tender, if they want to tender Saucedo $1 million contract, am I going to be upset by that? No. Do I think they could spend that $1 million better? Possibly, yeah. But we'll see.
So let's dive into that a little bit more. Let's talk about who could get tendered and non-tendered, who should get tendered and non-tendered, all that in just a moment. But first, a reminder that this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by Booking.com. Explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. Even an Orioles fan or a Guardians fan can have a good time in New York no matter what happens on the diamond this October. You can drown your playoff woes with a New York slice or celebrate advancing to the next round with a delicious chopped cheese, all while taking in the autumn vibes in Manhattan and capping it all off with a great stay in the city. Booking.com delivers exactly the right U.S. stay for you, and the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. We're dissecting the Mariners arbitration projections from MLBTradeRumors.com. Now we are going to talk about who could get tendered, who could get non-tendered, and who should as well. Like what's our opinion on the matter, which obviously could differ from what actually winds up happening, of course. So obviously they're going to tender the big four of Arozarena, Gilbert, Kirby, Cal Raleigh. That equals $30.9 million.
It's worth noting, just throw it out there, you don't have to exchange numbers if you work out an extension with somebody.
Of course. Yeah, you can buy out the RBers. You can buy out
lower
some
the
free
cost
agent
this year and push the money down the line. Like there's a lot of creative things you can do if you want to extend Randy Arozarena or Logan Gilbert this year to kind of lower their cost for this season and just kind of agree to pay them what they're losing this year down the line, which players do all the time because the contracts are guaranteed. Just throwing that out there.
For sure, absolutely. So that leaves 8 guys though that are arbitration eligible. Austin Voth, JT Chagua, Luis Arias, Trent Thornton, Josh Rojas, Sam Haggerty, Taylor Saucedo, and Gabe Spire. So here's where I'm at. Arias, absolutely at $5 million going to get non-tendered.
Yep. I mean, that's a guarantee. Take that to the bank.
Sam Haggerty, even though it's $900,000, he's coming off of a significant injury and he's out of minor league options. So pretty sure he's getting non-tendered as well. I think that's a safe bet.
Watch him coming back on a minor league deal though.
Yep.
Definitely
absolutely.
not out of the question.
For sure. So after that though, I wouldn't be surprised if any of these guys got tendered or non-tendered, to be honest with you. I do think one of Austin Voth or Trent Thornton gets non-tendered because I think the Mariners look at both of those guys and think we can get someone who does something similar for the league minimum. You know, maybe we have one of those guys in the org, whatever, right?
I mean, they got Austin Voth for $1.2 million last year, and only 780 that was guaranteed.
Yeah.
So they literally just did it.
Yeah. So I think one of those guys gets non-tendered. I don't know who, maybe Voth, but
might be whichever one is willing to take the best deal. You wouldn't think there'd be a huge difference between $200,000 but to the Mariners, unfortunately, that might end up mattering. So if one of them is willing to take $2 million instead of the 2.2 or 2.1, that might be the deciding factor, unfortunately.
Yeah. We'll get to Rojas in a second, but the 2 guys that I'm really hung up on here right now is Saucedo and Spire. Because the numbers aren't egregious, and we know that the Mariners are going to want to have some lefty options for the bullpen. And they know both of these guys, and Spire, I know they really like, and he's coming off of a couple of injuries this year.
Was nails the year before.
Yeah. And Saucedo, obviously, they really like, and he's become a fan favorite and all that stuff. Yeah.
Fills a couple different roles.
But both are also coming off of down years, and Spire is going to be out of minor league options. Saucedo, I think he didn't get option this year, right? So he gets to keep his minor league option.
I feel like he did, but I don't. Maybe it was IL.
Yeah, he rehabbed. Remember, he had that scary looking injury in Minnesota.
That's right. It was
So that doesn't count as an option. So I believe he gets to keep his minor league option going into 2025. But Spire did get optioned this year, so he will lose his last minor league option. So I guess maybe for that reason, Spire gets non-tendered. But again, both of these numbers, not egregious whatsoever. And even if you want to keep Spire and he ends up not making the team, or he doesn't make sense for your roster, whatever. So, like I said, we'll get to Rojas in a second because he's kind of the big one here out of the 8 remaining guys. I think JT Chagua is going to get non-tendered, by the way, $1.7 million. I think they look at him as another one of those guys where it's like, we can probably do basically the same for about $1 million less.
I look at the list and I'm non-tendering Chagua. I'm non-tendering Urias. I'm non-tendering Thornton, I think is how I would look at it. And then I would tender both. I would tender Saucedo and Spire. Just because, again, if I carry Spire into spring training and he doesn't look good or he's still hurt, I DFA him. I call up somebody else. I'm not out really any money. Or maybe I can even trade Spire in a small deal, like they did with Tyson Miller, which again, nope. Yeah. Wasn't a great decision, but whatever. We're not rehashing that again.
Going from Tyson Miller to Mike Bauman wasn't great.
Did not work.
Great. Yeah.
But yeah, Saucedo and Spire, I think they're both middle guys and they're making $1 million and you're a middle guy. I just don't see that big of a bonus in saving $220,000 to hope that, I don't know, pick the who's the guy who's been in the organization forever? The reliever.
Travis Kuhn.
Yeah. Okay. Instead of banking on him being anything, how about we just pay an extra $200,000 and see if Gabe Spire is what he is. And if he's not, then we could just DFA Spire at the end of the year, put him on waivers and call up Travis Kuhn.
Yeah.
Not a big deal.
Yeah. So Josh Rojas, $4.3 million. It's a little bit less than I think both you and I were expecting. I think we're both expecting somewhere around 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does that $700,000 change your mind? Cause you seem fairly firm within the boat of non-tendering him.
At 4.3, it's an interesting conversation. At 5+, it's probably a no, because what I look at Josh Rojas is I can't have him be my starting third baseman next year. There's just no way.
Yeah.
At $4.3 million, in theory, Rojas can be my utility guy. He's got some pop. He can steal a few bags. We know he's a really good defender at third base and second base. Yeah. He's even played a little bit in the outfield this year. He gives you a decent at bat. It's not like he's, we're not close and he's ridiculously bad.
And I mean, he's shown twice that he can get on a run for about a month where he's really good. Right.
But if you're the Mariners, didn't everything I just described, isn't that just Dylan Moore, who you're already paying $3 million to? Does it make sense to have Rojas and Moore on the bench at the same time?
Well, who else are you going to have on your bench?
Right. So, Rojas is an interesting one at that price. If they tendered him at that price, I wouldn't be upset. I feel like I could probably do a little bit better for less. Would I rather have Rojas at that money or Ahmad Rosario at that money? I'd rather have Rosario at that money.
Sure. Yeah.
But can I get Rosario at that money? A player like Rojas, the Mariners brought him in from outside and they paid him $4 million. I don't think anybody's upset. I don't think anybody's throwing a fit. And obviously they know Rojas pretty well. So they must have a good idea if they think he can rebound and how he fits in the clubhouse and all that stuff. So at 4.3, it certainly is more of a option, like an actual option for me. But I think ultimately I would say no, because I need a new third baseman. And if I want to if I want just kind of that bench role player, like another one of those type of guys, I feel like I have Ryan Bliss in the minors for free.
Well, let's just look at it like this. $4.3 million for a slightly below average bat with a really good glove at third base, can also play second base and some outfield. That's worth $4.3 million. Absolutely. Right. But for the Mariners, who are working within a budget,
well below what they should be operating under.
Yeah. Specifically the Mariners front office working within a budget. Does that make the most sense for them to pay him that as a utility player? Because look, they cannot, like you said, they cannot roll with Josh Rojas and try to sell us on like, yeah, he's the starter at second base or third base heading into 2025 after what we saw after essentially the midway point of May.
I think the only way
he fell off. Can't remember.
Yeah. It was about the first 6 weeks. He was one of the best hitters in baseball. And then for the last, 4.5 months, he was one of the worst.
Yeah.
I think the only way you sell that is if it's like, hey, we're going to platoon Moore and Rojas at second base until Cole Young is ready. And then Cole Young will be the everyday second baseman. But even then it's like, okay, well, what if Cole Young takes a huge step back? What if he's not ready? And is it $7 million of your limited budget on second base instead of just giving Cole Young the shot right away for free? You know what I mean? It just, I don't, by the way, they could tender Rojas and then trade him later in the winter. Cause I do think some team would be interested.
They can do that. They can also trade Dylan Moore.
Right. I mean, you could tender Rojas at like $4 million, go into the spring, and then you could trade him and eat like $2 million, and maybe you trade Rojas for a reliever or something. Like if you see you look at Cole Young, you go, hey, I think Cole Young's ready for the challenge. We don't need Rojas. Let's save $2 million by trading Rojas and $2 million, and let's go get I don't know, maybe another Troy Taylor, like who might be a half year away from the big leagues, and you're like, hey, this guy's got a shot to be something for us in the pen. Like you might be able to do that. So just because they tender him, if they do tender him, doesn't mean that he's a lock to be on the opening day roster by any stretch. Because at that price, you can absolutely trade him. Mm-hmm. So maybe they just do that just to have that option. But again, it seems kind of like a luxury when you're working with the budget that the Mariners are, that we assume they are.
Yeah. So again, do I think Rojas is worth that? Yes, absolutely. 100%. He's worth more than that, frankly, given the tool set that he brings, despite all the offensive struggles that we saw this year. But things don't work in a vacuum here. So for the Mariners specifically, this $4.3 million for a second utility player make a ton of sense for them, given that they also have Ryan Bliss, given that they also have Ben Williamson, who might be a factor at some point in 2025.
Leo Rivas. And then obviously Dylan Moore.
Yeah, probably not. But we'll see.
I'd be curious to know what the people think. If you had to choose one to be your utility player next year, Dylan Moore or Josh Rojas, Moore going to make about $1.2 million less than Rojas.
Yeah,
give or take. Just call it $1 million. Would you rather have Dylan Moore be the utility guy or Rojas? I feel like I know how people are going to vote. For the record, my vote would be Dylan Moore.
My vote would be Dylan Moore as well, because there's more power upside. He'll steal more bags. He can play more positions.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he's cheaper. Mm-hmm. I feel like we know who Dylan Moore is at this point as a player. Yeah. And while it's a significantly flawed one, it is undoubtedly a valuable one as well.
Yeah.
But let us know what you guys think.
Yeah, let us know. So definitely something to think about there. But again, wouldn't be surprised if all of these guys got tendered, except for Arias and Haggerty, and also wouldn't be surprised if all of them got non-tendered. So we'll see how they go about it. But at the very least, you are adding $30.9 million between Arozarena, Gilbert, Raleigh, and Kirby. So at the very least, if you decline Polanco's option, you are going to be at $128 million.
And again, that's not counting all the new roster spots that would need to be filled by league minimum guys.
Yeah, that's not including, pre-arb guys like Brian Wu, Bryce Miller, etc. And those guys are making, $770K.
Right.
So, yeah. So keep that in mind. So obviously it's not just 128 million. It's more like 135, but 128, that's the number that you need to know as of right now. All right, so that is going to do it for our show. Before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.